do this. So welcome to Bending Reality Day 1. We're super excited to get started. We got a lot in store for you. It's going to be magical. We're going to kick off today with a guided meditation with our Director of Coaching, Jen Schmidt. Jen, take it away.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here this morning. I was just listening to some of last night's session, and it was just so powerful. And I'm very excited to be here, just to be in this space, but certainly to be welcoming all of you into this space. This is a nice big group, and it just feels incredible. So we are going to start with a meditation. So I'm first going to invite you, just remind everybody as you're logging in to please make sure you're muted. And Dave, are we ready to start the music?
Yep, we should be good to go.
All right, perfect. I'm going to turn off my camera. I invite you all just to take a moment and get nice and comfy. Maybe if you're holding your notebooks or anything like that, go ahead and set them down just so you can really let go of your senses and feel deeply into the meditation. And in this short meditation, you will discover and embody your infinite self as you return your sense of identity home, journeying from your body, from your mind, from your limited concept of who you are, back to your eternal, infinite beingness. This is who you really are, the seat of infinite beingness from which all is manifest. I invite you to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. In and out. In and out. Allow your shoulders to drop and your jaw to soften. In and out. As your eyes remain closed, focus your attention inward toward your heart center. Notice, just observe, there is a presence, a spirit, an aliveness here. As your attention remains on this presence, see what you can notice about it. It's pure. It's peaceful. It's complete. It's unchanging. It's never ending. In the silence surrounding this presence, just simply observe. Now, visualize this presence as a ball of energy, a radiant mass of light eternally shining at the center of your soul. As your attention remains on this ball of light energy, notice it's getting larger and larger and even larger, until it finally engulfs you so fully that you are at the very center of its eternal glow. From this center, feel the light radiating from you in all directions. Feel this radiant light encompassing your consciousness. As it radiates out, it is encompassing your body. Radiating out fuller still to encompass your city. With you, your awareness, your consciousness at the center, this light radiates out, illuminating, encompassing your state, your country, your planet, your universe, and beyond. Like a projector focusing light on an empty screen of space, all existence is now projecting from the center of your soul, from the center of you. You are the source and expression of it all. Now think of your present circumstances, your finances, your relationships, your world, knowing that it is you who projects it all. Notice how, from this place, nothing is impossible. It is you who gives life to the entirety of existence. Notice how all appearances you encounter are simply your light projecting outward. As you remain eternally still, peaceful, and complete, your beingness at the center of it all. And really feeling this state of being. Really feeling this state of infinite power. We're going to begin to bring this state of beingness with us as we return to our physical reality, allowing yourself to feel this presence. I want you to also feel your body sitting in your seat. Become aware of your feet on the floor, your hands resting in your lap or on the sofa. Become aware of your breath. With a nice deep breath in and out. And notice how you are still connected with this infinite power, with this peacefulness, as you bring your awareness fully back. Opening your eyes. You're rolling your shoulders and allowing yourself to be fully conscious, fully present, and back. Fully in your body. Wow. Welcome back. I always love the deliciousness of that space between meditation and our waking reality. So I welcome you to gently come all the way back into this place. This is going to be a very power-packed session full of deep truth bombs and energy and richness. And with that, I would like to open up our session 1 of the Bending Reality Retreat. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for making the time for yourself, for holding space for yourself and holding space for each other. This is just such an incredible weekend. I can't wait. And with that, I'd like to introduce Michael Gustin, co-founder of Reality Hacker, and one of the most extraordinary teachers I have ever had the pleasure of working with in my life. Thank you so much, Michael. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for leading that wonderful meditation. You know, if Esther Hicks were here, I have a feeling she would say something to the effect of, "It is a good morning." And it's a good morning when you choose to feel good, because when you choose to feel good, your brain, your consciousness, your vibration causes you to find more and more things to feel good about. Before you know it, you've created a chain of goodness inside of yourself. I cannot speak enough to allowing your mind to rest in the stillness of a sustenance meditation practice. You know, for myself, it's taken many different journeys and avenues and facets. You know, my journey started almost 13 years ago at a discipleship school in Los Angeles. And that was my introduction to prayer, to meditation. It was under the guise of Christianity. And throughout my time as a pastor in many different denominations, I saw many different and experienced many different meditation practices. But the one commonality that exists in Christian prayer, in contemplative prayer, in Orthodox prayer, in Taoist prayer, in Buddhist spaces, is the stillness, this, and Jen said it, deliciousness, sweet, the very, you know, and there are older scriptures that use a tasty, sweet allegory for where our soul is when we find ourselves deep in meditation. And to be honest with you, I could not speak more for advocating for you to develop your own meditation practice. You know, this journey of manifestation on many levels takes many different forms, but if I could succinctly summarize it, I think one of the biggest themes in successful manifestation is self-regulation. And I do believe that a meditation practice can absolutely be the key for you in developing a solid framework to self-regulate, right? Because when we're in the middle of a reaction and we're reprogramming the reaction, we're examining, we're becoming mindful of where these reactions are coming from, we can tap back into the memory, right? We talked about the book last night, The Body Keeps the Score. And what's interesting about the body keeping the score is that the body keeps the score for both negative and positive events. As you slip into awareness, into that sweet space of nothingness, your body remembers it. And interestingly enough, this happens as well with deep repetitive immersion in states of consciousness. You know, what I've learned about manifesting anything is that initially tapping into a state can be antagonizing, frustrating, weird, if you've never experienced that sort of state before, which is why we tell everybody that we work with, it's not about how long you sit in a state, it's about how much you return back to it. Because the more you return back to it, the more your body creates the memory for it. And as your body creates the memory for it, living from that state becomes autonomous. It becomes subconscious, right? Because that's what we all want. We want to have our infinite beliefs existing inside of us in such a way that we don't have to go in front of the mirror every day and say, hey, I love you. You're powerful. As cool as that can be, and as much as it makes me feel like Johnny Bravo from Cartoon Network, I enjoy being able to wake up understanding that this human journey, in the midst of its temporariness, is the matrix from which the infinite being that I am is experiencing itself. And that is a beautiful thing. That is a beautiful thing. And so today we're going to dive in to session 1. I am so excited for all of you to be here. Can everybody see? Are we good here? Awesome. All right. Welcome again. I am tremendously excited. This is probably, if you've been with us for a while, our journey as an organization has been all about bringing the most advanced manifestation techniques and frameworks and formulas, and not just the most advanced, but the most effective frameworks and formulas in existence to you in a way that is digestible, integratable, and ultimately successful. So let's dive in. The first thing that we want to do here, before we get into the top state, all the good stuff here, we want to get into the anatomy of reality. And the reason it's so important to understand how reality works, and we read about it in Neville, and we say, well, consciousness is the cause, conditions are the effect. Awesome, love it. But I want to understand how the infinite consciousness that I am filters through the human matrix that we refer to as Michael. Because when I understand the logistics of consciousness, that's going to be a whole course in and of itself. When I understand the logistics and structure of consciousness in the same way that I understand how water flows most effectively or how lighting patterns exist most efficiently, as I understand the system, the structure, the foundation from which reality appears to itself, my ability to take hold in moments of contrast, come back to myself. I'm telling you, understanding these layers, these realms, it's going to transform your life. And if you've read our unified book, if you've taken the I Am experience, we've slightly dived into this, but we're going to dive into it even more than we ever have. So we're going to be talking about 4 realms. Count them, 4 realms. Okay. Realm 1. This is the formless seed. This is what many would call spacelessness. This is the place where you're in non-duality and they say nothing exists. Because this point right here, we can call it source, awareness, beingness, the absolute supreme reality, God, the vortex, higher self, spirit, infinite intelligence, truly has no form. There is no conceptualizable form for this. It literally cannot be defined. Hence why and how it is the fundamental realm. And as you're going to learn, everything else comes from this place of formlessness, of beingness. Realm 2, this is where consciousness begins to formulate itself, begins to condition itself. It begins to turn into elements. It begins to turn into forms of matter, right? So we're looking at atoms, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, right? The table of elements. Consciousness first appears as light, which then transforms into form. And I may have skipped ahead of myself a little bit here. But what you see here is almost like, you could almost imagine this to be a funnel. And I wish I could draw, actually I could draw on this. I'm not going to, because Dave did a wonderful job building it out. But you could almost look at this like a funnel. Imagine there's a dot right here where my mouse is. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse? Okay, there's a dot right here. Imagine a line just goes like that, and a line just goes like that. You know, like a loudspeaker, it kind of gets bigger as it goes, right? What happens here is this core, this beingness, as light diffuses into conditioned consciousness, which takes us into realm 3, which is where this begins to get really filtered. Mind, imagination, state, belief, assumptions, stories, right? Inner narratives, feelings, identities, thought, ego, conscious, subconscious, vibration, emotion. We're using these keywords so that you can really understand where in the pipeline of light diffusing itself into form ultimately turns into you. And so the truth is, what happens here, every time I come back to beingness, I come back to this infinite state, I'm self-identifying, I'm taking myself through each of these realms instantaneously. What happens here, the interesting thing about this is that these realms are realms you have been traveling through unconsciously your entire life. This funnel right here is the very diffusion of the infinite consciousness that we are into the form of matter, in this case, Homo sapiens, the human species. Ultimately, realm 4, this is the manifestation. This is where the physicality comes into play. So you can really say that ultimately elements and matter and that sort of thing appear here, but on top of that, they form here. I had a really interesting conversation about gravity the other day. You know, the interesting thing about gravity is that there's a point of mass. Gravity occurs when a certain point of mass accumulates and begins to create a center. If you look at the process of a star being created, light turns into condensation, which turns into gas, which turns into expansion, which then turns into a stellar system. And at the end of a stellar system's life, the star explodes. Some cases it turns into a black hole, which completely sucks in all light, spits it out on the other end in the form of a quasar, or in the place of a dead star, a stellar nursery is born with multiple stars being born in its place. The universe, this universe is absolutely one of the most beautiful things to ever exist, but why wouldn't it be? We created it. It is absolutely amazing as I begin to understand how consciousness diffuses itself into the realm of physical matter. And what's interesting here is that I can't get out of any of these realms at any given time. Even when I'm identifying as nothing, I'm still identifying. But what's really interesting here is how this is observed. So energy moves from source, awareness, beingness, realm 1, right? That field of infinite potential that cannot be labeled or defined. And it passes through consciousness, right? Interface, mind, spirit, soul, whatever word you want to use there, the container of individualized experience, it moves through, I guess we can use the word ego, right? This energy is then filtered and conditioned by the mind, by imagination. This is what I would call level 2 ego. And ultimately what happens is that it's then expressed in the body and world. And so what's really interesting here is despite the fact that I am actually here, this is my true being, this is how that true being diffuses into what I call my human experience. And so interestingly enough, I can never experience something without first having filtered and conditioned information having gone through my mind. What's interesting enough to that is that I won't experience anything that hasn't been filtered and conditioned by my mind and imagination. And this is exactly why what we believe we are, we become. Because more than anything else, the body is a projection mechanism. And we talked about that in the meditation. We dove into that. The body projects the consciousness that is held inside of it. You can imagine for a second consciousness, for illustrative sake, consciousness to be a marble in the center of your solar plexus. And imagine light rays coming out of every possible square pixel of that marble. And then those light rays filtering through your body out into the world around you. Joe Dispenza calls this ultimately the field. And now there's been studies proven that show how our consciousness actually creates an electromagnetic field 12 feet around our body. If you want to do more studies on that, check out the Resonance Science Academy and Nassim Haramein. Amazing stuff there on the metaphysical science of consciousness. What happens here is I'm always taking the essence that I am, consciousness, source, passing it through the container of individualized experience, right? This is where I begin the process of assigning meaning. Because if you think about this, if you really slow down your reaction in any experience, you'll realize that you take different data sets, and according to what those data sets mean to you, you then come to a conclusion which shapes your rationalization, not only about yourself, but about the situation. I cannot help but take infinite awareness, combine it with what I have assigned to be true, filter that through my response, both emotionally, biochemically, right? What floods my body and my reaction, real chemicals. When you have a response of anxiety, in the same token, having a response of excitement, there's serotonin, there's cortisol, there's dopamine, biochemical responses that are literally flowing through our body. And I'm not going to get into the electricity that exists in our body because that's a whole different story, but quite literally a vibrational frequency, a vibrational resonance. This is not a woo-woo concept. It's scientific. Like, it is scientifically proven that biochemical responses combined with the electricity of consciousness produce a bodily resonance. Just like the actual earth has a resonance, that's called the Schumann resonance. The earth itself has a frequency, and it's been proven as you align yourself to the habitual frequency of the earth, your sense of alignment goes through the roof, but that's for another retreat. But this is real science we're talking about here. And ultimately that filtering, those biochemical responses, think about that. When you have a biochemical response, when you fall in love, when you feel like the world's about to end, everything you think about from that point on is filtered through that conviction. Think about it. It's why we do stupid things. Well, I guess they're not always stupid in hindsight. I mean, maybe they are, let's be honest. But when emotions occur, they literally cloud our entire sense of judgment. And everything we see and we hear and we feel is interpreted through that lens. And it's insane the way I learned this, because I learned this through the very, very unhealthy behavior of manipulating myself to fall in love with people I wasn't in love with for my own sense of security. Did that for a very long time. And it's interesting looking back on it, how easily I was able to manipulate myself into falling in love with somebody that I wasn't really in love with. Because when I chose to invoke those emotions, those states of consciousness, my entire world was filtered through that, and everything that I did. Don't get me wrong, like even most of those times that I manipulated myself to be in love with somebody that I wasn't in love with, amazing things. Don't get me wrong, right? But it didn't change the fact that I was observing myself, manipulating myself into completely convincing myself that something was true and watching the world unfold as a response. You are so ridiculously powerful. It is insane. So ultimately, what we want to talk about here is source and consciousness, awareness, right? Realms 1 and 2. If we go back here, just so we can see this, realms 1 and 2, right? This is really the totality of who you are. This is where the beingness that we are begins to limit itself. But realm 1, this is really your identity. The problem is you've been convinced that you are this. You've been convinced for so long that you are the effect of consciousness rather than the cause. And what's so interesting is remembering what Jesus said, I and the Father are one, but the Father is greater than I. And I really believe that what he meant there is that there's no fundamental separation between the consciousness that we are and the greater consciousness which governs this entire universe and all of its principles and systems. But when I consider the human experience, the greaterness exists not in substance, but in capacity. But even in that capacital greatness, I'm not limited. And that is the most important thing to understand. Because as a human, you're not walking around pulling in power. As a human, you're walking around as this ball of infinite consciousness, filtering infinite power through the lens of your seeming finite self. And so source, awareness, consciousness, prior to the world, prior to meaning, the source and substance of all existence, right? We talk about substance, we talk about essence, right? When we get, even if you look at this on a very physics-driven level, you look, the same fundamental particles make up all of the universe. What's really interesting, and this is just a side note that I had earlier, what's really interesting is that light is, in this third dimension, the fastest thing that there is, right? Nothing travels faster than light, 186,000 miles per second. What's really interesting is when you cultivate a deep meditation practice that allows you to loosen up your sense of form and tap into that formlessness, and how quick things begin to happen. And we're going to dive into this. We're going to dive into density. Light is the least dense thing in the universe. That's why it travels as fast as it does. Everything in this universe, every chemical or every proton, every neutron, every atom, I'm not going to be the most perfect scientist here, but none of them move faster than a photon. And from a photon, which is a particle of light, you find form beginning to happen. So let's not get too deep too quick. We're going to get deep this weekend, I pinky promise. So source awareness conscious being the source and substance of all existence, including matter. And if you've never read I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, I definitely recommend it. After I got tired of reading Neville, which I ultimately got back into, I got into a lot of non-duality. And to be honest with you, non-dual texts have been tremendously helpful in helping me reconcile the infinite being that I am with the human experience that I'm having. Because when you take the duality of Neville, of Abraham, of Esther, of even some of Lester Levinson, he goes back and forth. And you combine that with the non-duality of Taoist or subsects of Buddhist teachings, you find a beautiful normal. Because the truth is, and I'm not going to tell anybody that wants to, live in a temple, like this is what Nisargadatta Maharaj did, right? He lived his entire life after his beginning into all of this. He lived in the temple. He grew old with stomach cancer and he died in the temple. He literally lived there. He slept there. All he had was a shawl for his lower body, right? I'm not going to sit here and say that you're wrong if you do that, because there obviously is no wrong. But I will tell you that if you're wanting to take this and maximize the potential, taking these nuggets from non-duality, bringing them back into somewhat of a dualistic context gives you such a sense of empowerment, because at the same time, we're not fans of spiritual passivity. We're not fans of ignoring things that we know we shouldn't be ignoring just because we think we need to think positive. And that is my personal philosophy, is that if your spirituality does not reconcile both ends of the light spectrum, which, do I need to say, right, darkness and light, if you're only pretending half the spectrum exists, you have an incomplete spirituality. We have to be able to reconcile the shadow with the perfection that we are. So the world you perceive is made of consciousness. What you call matter is consciousness itself. Nisargadatta Maharaj. Ultimately, I want to take you through some of these to really begin to understand what happens when I begin to integrate this. You pervade this universe, and this universe exists in you. You are really pure consciousness. Do not be small-minded. I love that that's the last sentence. The Astavakra Gita. Hope I did not butcher that. And I would really encourage you, if you have not gone into this area, go into this area, because it's going to really show you more and more and more of the most fundamental, important pieces of manifestation. Like, to be honest with you, and I will probably say this a million times, we're going to walk you through the top state this weekend, but being able to manufacture states of consciousness is honestly not the most important thing here. Knowing who you are, knowing yourself is the most important thing, because when you know yourself, you will know the universe. I mean, it is so cliche, like that's such a motivational quote, right? But it is the most true thing ever as you begin, because you are literally a function of the universe experiencing itself. So why wouldn't this matrix, this body-mind complex, mimic the very systems that this universe is built on? Lester, let us now take a look at the apparency called the world. As we have discussed, the world is not only our mental creation. The world is only our mental creation. It is not external, but is a reality within us, within our mind. And someday you will discover this. Creation begins by first creating what we call a mind, which is a composite of all of our thoughts and feelings, conscious and subconscious. And then through this mind, we create our world. This is why practicing going back to awareness as a state in general, which we're going to get into, the top state, is probably the most powerful technique that you could use. Because what if you could put your life together piece by piece? Isn't that the whole reason you came to the manifesting space? So you could learn how to put your life together piece by piece. And so what we want to do here is we want to continue to understand that the mental creation of the world, when we talk about the world being a mental creation, it is not that it is not real. Okay, when I say real, I mean touch. Nobody is going to sit here and tell me that I'm not touching something, that I'm not interfacing with something. But what's happening here, the difference is not in the irreality of this or the non-existence of this. The difference is in the meaning that I assign. Because the truth is, this light is only a light because I've determined that it's a light. The fan is only a fan because I've determined that it's a fan. I have assigned that meaning. And most likely, the meaning that I've assigned to 99% of my life is meaning that somebody else has prescribed for me. I will agree for somewhat of a need of collective meaning agreements so that we can function as a society. But I also believe that nothing inherently has any meaning. And because of this, you can sever meaning assignments with social groups, determine your own meaning, and as a result, create your reality. And that's what I've learned for most people. One of their biggest fears is reassigning meaning. And we use the excuse of, well, people are going to think I'm crazy. But what's really happening is the reason meaning and the reassignment of it is so scary is because our entire personality is built around it. Every sense of security we place in our ego and the ego identity is built around the meaning that I have assigned. And this is tremendously important to understand because this applies in a positive aspect to manifestation, but this also applies to trauma. Traumatic experience happens, meaning is assigned, certain behaviors are either encouraged unconsciously, certain circumstances are read in a very specific way, and the cycles tend to repeat themselves. Because the meaning that we assign directly affects the state of consciousness that we enter into. And the state of consciousness that we enter into directly affects the action that we take. And the action that we take directly affects the outcome that we receive, that we experience, that we interface with. And so it's impossible for me, as long as the meaning I've assigned, limiting, segmenting, compartmentalizing, to truly step into the meaning that's going to transform my life. And what better fundamental meaning to assign to yourself than the fact, the assumption, the conviction that you are the totality of the universe experiencing itself subjectively. If you know that the meaning you assign directly influences the state of consciousness that you enter into, obviously the goal is to have the best state, the best meaning assigned as possible. I want to have the highest level of meaning because I want to have the highest state of consciousness because I know that my state of consciousness is a byproduct from the meaning that I'm assigning. So what I have to do is, when we talk about, getting rid of your limiting stories, getting rid of your limiting beliefs, you don't really need to get rid of any of it. You need to experience more of the infinite being that you are to such a degree that that overshadows. It overshadows all of your limiting beliefs. Buckminster Fuller said that we don't destroy old systems by focusing on them. We destroy old systems by building new ones. And because every single belief is inherently untrue, any belief that you subjectively adhere to becomes true. The reason that is true is because all beliefs are fundamentally untrue. And not just because all beliefs are fundamentally untrue, but because the source of your being is beyond belief. Right? You don't exist inside of states of consciousness. States of consciousness exist inside of you. I want you to imagine for a second. I want you to imagine a bubble, okay? Just picture a bubble for a second. Maybe it's as big as your head. That way we can go where we want to go with this. And I want you to put inside of this bubble, let's treat it like a snow globe, okay? I want you to put an environment in this bubble for a second. For me, I've got a layer of dirt with a house that's on a hill. There's a couple trees, maybe there's a car, right? Honestly, it's very James and the Giant Peach-esque. I don't know why, but I want you to just go with me for a second. And I want you to see all of this in black and white. I want you to see the tree is dead, the ground not as green, not as yellow, but as gray. I want you to see the house, whatever environment that you're seeing, take all of the life and the color out of it. What I want you to do is I want you to immerse your being into it. I want you to absorb yourself with that bubble, with that environment, and watch it light up. Watch the color come to life as you immerse yourself, as you merge with that bubble. Watch the tree start to come to life. Watch the leaves turn red and yellow. Watch the house turn into brick and beautiful marble, right? Watch the cars, watch the wind blowing the leaves on the ground. And I want you to take that bubble out of you again, and I want you to watch it die. And I want you to watch it turn gray. And I want you to bring it back, and I want you to bring it to life again. This is a very interesting perspective, because what it does is it helps us understand what it means to enter into a state of consciousness, because what does Neville say? Creation is finished. Your desires are already yours. But until you're one with your desires, you won't bring them to life. So that's my quest here. How do I become one with my desire to where I've got no resistance? Well, that's easy. Go to the source of desire, which is the infinite consciousness that you are. And that's what we're going to be doing this entire weekend. Creation begins by first creating what we call a mind. That's a composite of thoughts and feelings, the conscious and the subconscious. And then through this mind, we create our world. So you look at light. We're going to draw over here. You look at light, okay? Infinite consciousness, right? Awareness, beingness. Then you look at a mind, which is a compilation of conscious and subconscious, right? Patterns and energy generators. And then you look at the world, experiences, people, pizza delivery people, people playing soccer with their kids. And so this light, it filters. What's interestingly enough is how this light is filtered is directly dependent on how well you have a reign on who you are. Like, honestly, when you really, we go back to this over and over and over again, the journey of successful manifestation is self-regulation, because you are always conditioning infinite consciousness into form, whether you want to or not. By the very nature of the matrix of your mind-body complex, you are taking infinite consciousness and forming it every single time you assign meaning. And you assign that meaning, and some of it becomes very true, so fundamentally true, you're not even aware of how true it is. And it translates into this. Ka-chow, baby. Ka-chow. And if I could really draw this out, I would add some pinks right? You guys remember the Pink Floyd album, The Dark Side of the Moon? And it has light and the prism and the diffusion of light on the other side. It's a very clear image of how consciousness becomes human, becomes turned into matter, precious, infinite, substanceless light. It's a matrix, right? In the allegory case, it's a crystal. And light is diffused through the other side of the crystal in a spectrum: orange, purple, green, yellow. And here's the really amazing thing about this. Despite the fact that light is being diffused into a spectrum, the essence of the light is never removed from the diffusion. Although the diffusion appears to be separate, it appears to be orange, it appears to be green, blue, pink, it is that same infinite light interfacing with a matrix that diffuses it. Good stuff. Thank you for letting me draw something I've wanted to do since I was a kid. Not only are all things made by God, but they are made of God. All are the offspring of God. God is one. Things or divisions are the projections of the one. God being one, he must command himself to be the seeming others, for there is no other. I'm not sure what book this is from, but it reminds me of the first chapter of The Power of Awareness, where Neville says that despite appearing as a division or level of things, there's only one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively, and you are that consciousness. You know, it's so interesting to me, and I was the same way. You know, when I first got into Neville, the reason I got into Neville was because I wanted the step-by-step formulas. I wanted the techniques, and I knew that Neville best reconciled with my previous Christian background, right? Neville talked about the scriptures, really helped me reconcile a lot of different things. And I love Neville because he gave me the techniques. Get in your chair, get in a state akin to sleep. Imagine as if you already had what you want. Explore the feeling, go to bed, right? Very simple. And I loved it. But what I've come to understand personally, right, for me, the most powerful things that Neville has said are not his techniques. They are, it seems like when I read every other sentence, when he says that you are not using your imagination. You're not some limited creature that has an imagination as an accessory. You are your imagination, dreaming yourself to be human. And I love the concept of the dream. And when you relate the dream to reality, what's so interesting is that after this universe, after the omega point occurs and all matter is sucked back into a singularity, it kind of has the same effect that waking up from a dream has. When you're in a dream, when you're dreaming, there's a lot of people in your dream. There's a lot of environments in your dream. There's textures. If you're dreaming, you know, if you have vivid dreams like me, you can feel, you can taste, you can touch, you can smell, you can interact with people, you can interact with animals, you can interact with beings from other dimensions, right? And yet, when you wake up, you recognize that there was a sense of inobjectivity to your dream, because now in your waking moment, you're in a completely different reality. And what's so interesting here is when you take the totality of all things and you shut down the individuality of it, you shut down the universe as a set of forms and matter and pieces of matter, you have a singular consciousness aware of itself, experiencing itself. How much different, really, is dreaming from the fundamental nature of reality? Because the truth is, even if I die a very gruesome death, there's a 99.9% chance that I will wake up instantaneously in another body and not even know the difference. And I mean, when you really think about that, almost reminds me of a video game. When you die, you respawn, and your character has none of the effects from its previous death. Now, we can get into the logistics of generational trauma on another day. That's not my point here. But there's something to be said about understanding the logistics of the consciousness that we are and how it works in the middle of all things. And this is why I truly believe that when it comes to humanity, the only thing that's going to help humans evolve, that's going to take them to where they need to go, is the recognition of this. Because there is not my life and your life. Your life is my life. And until we understand that, we won't end the cycles that destroy us. So many, it's amazing how many of the vices that separate us and keep us enlarged in separative viewpoints are literally the byproducts of fundamental beliefs of finiteness. We are greedy because we feel limited. We are, most of the time, I could go into a lot of comparisons here. I'm not going to do that. But there are a lot of the negative vices that we carry simply come from that fundamental belief in separation. Because when you really begin to explore a fundamental place of fullness, where is the need? When you begin to explore fullness in your body, the sense of need disappears. It disappears in your body, which your body being a filter for how you experience the world, it literally begins to disapparate your sense of need in the world around you. Like you are an infinite being experiencing itself, and you are the only one that is going to save you. And you will save yourself by becoming aware of yourself. Nobody, we hope for these big, I'm convinced that for a lot of us, we hope for the big manifestations, not because we're going to enjoy them, but because they're going to save us from what we're afraid of. And they won't. I can guarantee you, if you're manifesting something out of fear or out of avoidance or out of, I want to manifest this so I don't have this, it's not going to work out. I can guarantee you it's not going to work out, because the entire root of your situation was avoidance and fear. And when you water a seed, that seed produces the DNA of itself in the world around it. Right? Again, this does not change. As within, so without. As above, so below. Let me move this a little bit. There you go. Your awareness of being is the liquid light of the world, which crystallizes into the conceptions you have of yourself. Your unconditioned awareness of being first conceived itself in liquid light, the initial velocity of the universe, right? The speed of light. Look, Neville's even talking about the speed of light, homies. All things, from the highest to the lowest vibrations or expressions of life, are nothing more than different vibrations of velocities of this initial velocity. Gold, silver, iron, wood, flesh. They are only different expressions or velocities of the one substance, liquid light. And I love this. If you take your body apart at an atomic level, your body is not solid. You have quadrillions of atoms that are holding themselves together in a magnetic field, forming what you believe to be your body. And that's exactly why you can put a needle in your skin and you start to bleed. Because what's happening here is you're not penetrating a solid surface. You're squeezing between quadrillions of atoms. And it makes sense why you would bleed. Because you literally, if there's just tons of atoms held together in a field, and you remove a chunk of those atoms, what is underneath those atoms, the substance of those atoms, penetrates through. It makes sense. Like it just... And you look at I love this aspect of this because we really get into the science of it. You look at gold, you look at silver, you look at iron, you look at wood. What's so interesting, if you've ever done any gold panning, if you've ever done gold mining, what they'll tell you is that gold is usually found in riverbank deposits. In other words, when gold sees or experiences resistance, it doesn't fight forward. Gold tends to stay in the areas of the rivers and lakes and chasms where there is a bump of resistance, where there's a bank, a riverbank. You're going to find gold in a lot of riverbanks because the gold doesn't just continue going. It's heavy. It's density. Its density causes it to do that, right? But you think about a piece of wood, much lighter, even from an atomic level, the density of wood, much less than the density of gold. You put a piece of gold in the water, put a piece of wood on the water, we know which one's going to float. Density. Dude, there is such a correlation here between your state of consciousness, how you experience the world around you, and the density of this physical universe, and the categoric weights, measurements, atomic structures of every single form of matter. All things are crystallized liquid light. The differentiation or infinity of expression is caused by the conceiver's desire to know himself. You know, a lot of people ask me, what's the purpose of being human? And I say a lot of the times that I think it's to have fun, but I think the more higher all purpose of the human experience is to remember who you've always been. The human experience becomes that much more amazing when you fundamentally realize that it's not something you are trapped in. You are not trapped in this human experience. And any sense of being trapped ultimately comes as a relation of your self-concept to what's happening around you. Doesn't mean you're wrong if you feel trapped. Nobody's saying that you're wrong, but that very sense of being trapped is a direct byproduct of how you perceive yourself in relation to what's happening around you. And I'm convinced that the real reason this human experience is what it is and why, and so many of the breakthroughs that and evolutions and ups and downs, they tend to skim themselves out when we begin to understand who we are. If you notice in the awakening community, and I'm not talking about Instagram influencers, I'm talking about genuine awakened communities, you notice the ebbs and flows of life in these communities. You notice the lack of force, the abundance of flow. It's not that reality ceases to exist. It's that our ability to navigate reality becomes much greater, because that's what you want here. You don't want the negative things to stop existing or the things that you don't want. You don't. Trust me, you don't. What you do want is the ability to look them in the face, and as we said last night, not be controlled by them. I, for one, and some people think I'm crazy when I say this, which is totally fine. I welcome chaos, because chaos eventually turns into order. And order, and you see this throughout the lifespan of humanity, every single country, every single governance in human history, every single social group has experienced this. None is eliminated from it. Chaos into order, order into chaos. Throughout human history, we see empire after empire rising, ordering, falling, rising, ordering, falling. And this is an amazing thing, because for many of us, we are caught up, and I'm not here to judge anybody for nationalistic beliefs. You know, I'm not here to judge anybody who is patriotic. But I do believe that our adherences to so many of the things that don't allow us to understand the deeper structures of life are actually hindrances to our journey rather than helps. Don't get me wrong. I think America is great in a lot of ways. I think there are many countries that are really great, and I could get behind them. That's not the point. Understanding, though, that America, just like the British Empire, just like the Roman Empire, just like the Egyptian Empire, just like empires all going all the way back to Sumer and Mesopotamia, they rise and they fall. What's amazing about this is that when I begin to really look at the underlying patterns of reality, I'm no longer gripped by them. I'm no longer controlled by them, or the degree in which I am controlled by them becomes ultimately determined by how much I want to immerse myself in them. Right? And understanding these patterns is not a reason to not be involved in things, but it also gives us an opportunity to see the bigger picture here. That's what we want to do. We want to look at the bigger picture of this infinite being experiencing itself subjectively. And to be truthful here, if we're trying to leverage this information to not only better our own lives, but better the lives of the human species as a whole, we 100% have a responsibility to understand the patterns of our species and the patterns of the consciousness that we are, so that we can most deeply align with them. The spirit could not create matter as anything different from itself, for it had only itself as the tissue or material with which to build the cosmos. Spirit is the vast stillness which is behind all created things. And if you've taken our source meditation, I'm sure you've gotten there. If you did this meditation with Jen this morning, I'm sure you've gotten there, right? Paramahansa Yogananda. We're talking about realm 1. We're talking about realm 1 and realm 2, the infinite formless you. That's really where you are. The spirit could not create matter as anything different from itself, for it only had itself as the tissue or material with which to build the cosmos. And so you do get into sort of a panpsychic viewpoint here. That's really what happens. We begin to understand that consciousness is the driving factor behind all things. And it's beautiful, and it's chaos and it's order. And I love examining the dynamics of the universe that are beyond our human experience, because it helps me rationalize the human experience a bit more. You know, I think a lot, not as much, but I do think a lot about supernovas. You know, supernovas are happening every 30 seconds in our galaxy and galaxies all around the universe. What's really interesting is that a supernova within hours completely annihilates all life around itself. Completely destroys it. There's a planet, people on it, species, you're done, right? Who's sitting here judging that supernova? Who's sitting here judging and saying, well, you know, because you annihilated this many species and this many planets, you're gonna do this for 60 eternities, right? Or just some sort of like regulation of experience. I love looking at the supernova example, not because it gives us a license to go kill a bunch of people. Don't take that the wrong way. But it gives us this understanding that we are more obsessed over right or wrong, up and down, left and right, than even the universe is. And there's something beautiful about the chaotic processes of the universe that do not respect our containers and assignments of meaning. You know, there's no way the annihilation of a solar system won't happen unless the civilization in that solar system, if one exists, has become a type 2 civilization and is able to harness the power of that sun. But even then, science shows us that even if you created a Dyson sphere, eventually a star reaches the end of its life. And this is the most amazing thing here, because I look at death and I look at annihilation and I look at a complete destruction, and I'm no longer sitting here saying that's evil. And I'm taking that into myself as I'm destroying pieces of myself torically that have served me up to this point, that are leaving. There's nothing bad. There's nothing bad. There's nothing bad. What if I can look at the things that are happening inside of myself without a sense of judgment? What if I can allow things to unfold without needing to create a bunch of rationalizations and conditioned meanings around them? Because at the end of the day, even though that sun annihilated all life within a 3 or 5, 10 light year radius, everything that it annihilated and the sun itself, the star itself, are made up of the same fucking substance. They're made up of the same thing. And again, this is not an illustration meant to drive us to passivity, but ultimately to help us understand that in all of our need to rationalize and compartmentalize and label and organize so that we think we can have things under control, we're deceiving ourselves, we're deluding ourselves, because we're taking, one consciousness and dividing it exponentially. Early on in my journey, I remember being in a meditation session and I had a vision of the screen of space, just a black screen of space. And then I saw a grid start to appear, and I saw the screen of space being segmented and compartmentalized, very much like you would, look on a graph chart or something of sorts. But imagine the universe being, gridded and segmented and compartmentalized. And I realized that, the more I compartmentalized, the more I segmented, the more I tried to define and organize, the less freedom I had. Because I was so bent on trying to create the grid, control the grid, determine the grid, segment the grid, compartmentalize the grid, that I lost sight of what really mattered, which was my true essence. And I allowed my true essence to get squandered and defocused and splintered through my obsession with needing to control. What's really interesting here is when we begin to examine so many of these struggles that we deal with in relation to successful manifesting, like the need for control, when we truly allow our body to experience the fact that we are made of the same essence and substance that our fully completed desire is. The less I dive into separation-driven worldviews, and I really love and lean into the understanding that my consciousness, my very imagination, my very ability to imagine is actually infinite awareness diffusing itself. And through my imagination, I assign meaning and create form, I can experience things. The more I allow myself to lean into the fundamental mechanics of reality, the less I become concerned with all of the surface level techniques and methods. Like, I'll be honest with you, and I'm sure this is true for almost anybody on our team here at Reality Hacker, we get everything we want really, really well. I mean, Jen, we can talk about her success at some point. One of the most successful people I know, does work for some of the most influential people on the planet, runs the most amazing restaurant in Northern California. And, if I were to ask Jen about her manifestation practices, she wouldn't tell you she has a technique, but she would tell you that she has a self-identity that she returns to and then reapproaches all situations from, which then lead to the inspiration and the action that then cultivates the outcome. Jen, would you agree with me there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting. I think for a lot of us, starting on the journey almost requires going through early on some level of technique just to understand discipline, just to understand our role in our own reality. But then once you get that, yes, all of that is left behind. And no, I don't have techniques and things for manifestation. And yet I would dare say I'm a master manifester, and sometime I'll share all kinds of things about my story, but exactly as you said, Michael, what I do is focus on my state of being. And anytime I realize and recognize that things are not going the way I prefer, I know, having done this work, that that's just evidence that I'm out of alignment with that state of being. And using these techniques and everything we're going to learn this weekend, I know how to get back into that state very easily. And so absolutely, it's such a powerful place to be, to truly understand the nature of our reality and how to bend it, but really to understand that we are consciousness itself experiencing itself. But without having a framework, a supportive framework, it's difficult, to take that conceptualization into a manifestation of self. So all that is to say, understanding and implementing and integrating these principles are really fundamentally what make the difference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's such good stuff. And I, yeah, and I would say that, that truth applies to everybody on our team. Oops, sorry. All right, can everybody see this? Are we good back on the slides, Jen? Okay, good stuff. Yeah, when you are able to return to this essence, remember these fundamental mechanics, all of a sudden the need for techniques and stuff, it just goes away, right? Because when you're working with techniques, you're working from the fourth realm. You're trying to effort the body, which most of the time is probably like the hardest way to do this. And by the way, for those of you that are feeling overwhelmed, it's totally okay. First off, you're going to have a recording of this, so you're going to be able to listen to it as many times as you need to. But I think what we'll do sometime in the next week is I will have our team go through the recording and develop concise lists of bullet points and important points that we can turn together into a PDF for you guys, so you can really make sure that you got the most powerful bullet points down and integrated. And we may even give you these slides. It just depends, not really sure yet, but we're going to really focus on dissecting it and bringing it down. And just to preface, right, our session here today, this first session, it is the foundation, right? Everything that we're going to teach in the next 3 sessions, they won't matter without this information. We've distilled it down very specifically because when we present it in this way, we find that folks get some of the greatest results, okay? So another Paramahansa Yogananda, God is consciousness. There is essentially nothing in the universe but mind or consciousness. And again, right, we are continuing to dive into this understanding that I am fundamentally unreal. And another word I think you could use there is I am fundamentally untrue, just like a belief, right? Jen, were you going to say something? Did you raise your hand? Okay, good stuff. I as an existence, as an ego, right? I mean, what is an ego? Let's talk about this. What is an ego but a rubber band ball of beliefs? And the only reason there's a sense of solidarity is because there are so many rubber bands built around each other. And so ultimately, even though all those rubber bands are built around each other, none of them are fundamentally true, but in the building and the wrapping and the holding, that center of gravity, they become the definition of my experience. And this is an experiment I love. Ultimately, right, let's take a second. I want you to really contemplate this. Can you experience anything without consciousness? In other words, can you experience anything without it being filtered through infinite consciousness? Without assigning, can we experience something without it first being realm 1 and realm 2? Ultimately, the answer is no. Because I, as an individual, have to leverage the consciousness that I am, or I leverage the consciousness that I am, to then assign meaning. Like, here's the thing. I couldn't even assign meaning if I wasn't infinite consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. My very ability to assign meaning is my ability to create my reality. And for most of us, the biggest problem that we have is that we struggle to reassign meaning because something has meaned something to us for so long. And what happens with meaning is that because meaning essentially works in tandem with the ego, it creates a seeming sense of security. And when we really begin to get down to the fundamentals of so many of the beliefs that we carry, we justify them because we believe that there is some sort of security, some sort of comfort, there is some sort of essence that they give us. And this is completely backward thinking, because what's really happening here is I'm actually giving life to the belief. The belief has no life in and of itself, right? Remember earlier we used that bubble experiment. The belief has no life until I give it. I lay my life down and I take it back up. Can you experience anything without consciousness? And the answer is no. Science even demonstrates that all matter in the universe is actually 99.9999999% empty space. When you look on microscopic levels, subatomic levels, look with some of the most advanced microscopes that we have at atomic structures, the majority of the space in the fundamental building blocks of our reality is filled with nothing. There's actually more empty space in an atom, a fundamental building block of our universe, than there is actual matter and structure. That's a trip. Because what that tells me is not that the empty space implies nothingness, but that there is more nothingness, more formlessness than there ever is form. And then when I begin to break down my essence in relation to that example, I begin to see that the form that a structure takes is not the caused substance of its manifestation. The structure that a form takes is not the caused substance of its manifestation. It is the effect. An atomic structure is an effect of consciousness, not a cause. So this idea here, solid reality, is an illusion. And when we're talking about illusions, we don't talk about it being fundamentally unexperienced or unreal. We have to really understand the context of these words when we use them. And I think Rupert Spira, he says something really powerful. He says it's not that nothing is real, it's that things are not what they seem to be. And I love that because I think for so many of us, when we say that, you know, reality isn't real or blah, 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 it tends to justify suppression and ignorance, whether for ourselves or for things around us. And when we accept that it's not that reality isn't real, it's that reality isn't what it seems to be, all of a sudden, it's not that I'm looking at it as this solid, unpenetratable object. I'm looking at there's something else that causes the form of what I think to be true to come into that form. It's a dream. Reality is a dream of consciousness. Probably one of the longest dreams that have ever been recorded in existence, but nonetheless a dream, because when form ceases to exist, the observer of that form does not. Take that one to the bank. When form ceases to exist, the observer of that form does not. Getting alchemical, baby. Getting mystical. And you know what's so interesting on a side note? As I've gone deeper in my journey, I've become so much more grateful for water. I feel like water and light are some of the closest iterations of pure consciousness. You know, water's ability to retain memory, I think it retains like 70% of the memory that that is imprinted on it. Water is one of the most impressionable substances in existence and can be formed and fashioned in a million different ways. And I love that because it illustrates this process of consciousness, especially when I'm not looking at consciousness as a solid object, but rather you know, when Einstein was around, they used a word called the aether or the ether to define where form came from. We don't use those terms anymore because science in the West has become very materialistic in that it looks to the effect to try and find the cause, which we're not even going to get into that. But if you've learned about the double slit experiment, you know that light, more often than not, forms in this in the shadow, the fate, the fashion of the observer who is observing it. If you haven't watched the video on the double slit experiment, please go do. Classic quantum physics shows us really what happens with light. All right, we're getting into some good stuff. Let me check these texts. Yes. Great exhortation, Vanessa. I'd really, yeah, if you're taking notes, awesome. Try not to over intellectualize this. I'm honestly going to encourage everybody here, since you're going to get a recording of this, to listen to this whole retreat like at least once a month for the next 6 months. I think it's going to drastically support your journey, because as we talked about, I think we talked about this last night, we talked a little this morning, as you grow in your understanding, you will come back to the same concepts and see them in different lights. You will understand them on much deeper levels. You know, what I look at in our spiritual journey, and I do have a little bit on this board here, I'm not sure how much of it you can see, you know, but the journey to me is not really going in a straight line like this. What you're really doing is this. You're experiencing the same thing on deeper and deeper levels. You know, there's a certain point where you're going to be done learning new techniques. And hopefully, because you're here, that is a sign that you are done. And when you're done learning the new techniques, you're going to start learning the most powerful principles over and over and over again. Because I know there are some people here that are thinking, you know what? I just can't do it right. I just can't manifest right. I just can't, you know, I can't do this technique right. Well, you know, maybe it's not that you're not doing it right. Maybe you're just so obsessed with being right that you can't help but be wrong. You know, it's amazing to me, the subtle nuances of limiting beliefs. The very sense of needing to be right keeps us wrong. And not wrong in a fundamental invalid, right? We're talking surface level here. This need to do everything right is actually a representation of a belief that we are fundamentally insufficient. Because the belief that I have to do something right in order to get what I want literally is a belief that exists only in a world of conditionality. That belief cannot survive in the light of consciousness. And this is why I think that some of the most powerful truths in history, especially as it relates to Jesus, were related a lot to family structures, right? Because, and what's amazing to me is how hard it is to talk about family structures today just because of the state of things. But at the end of the day, right, the prodigal son was let back home, not because he did anything right, but because of who he was in the family, right? The son was a son regardless. And I love these allegories because for me, that was very much the journey. You know, there are scriptures that talk about this journey from going from a slave or a servant to a son, right? A servant or a slave only gets the crumbs off the table. The son sits at the table, or the daughter, right? Because of their identity, their fundamental place. And this was such a radical shift for me, because once I began to understand that the servant is a servant, not because somebody else determined that they are, but because they fundamentally believe that they have to do X, Y, and Z in order to get A. And the mentality of the child, the son or the daughter, is that the things, the needs, the desires, whatever they are, they're automatically deserving of them. They're automatically worthy of them. And I love this illustration of, you know, and I think that's why it's probably worked for humanity for so long, just because A, we have no idea where we came from a maternal and paternal perspective. You know, we know we came from monkeys and whatnot, but that's a whole different story and conversation. You know, this parental allegory has driven so many of our mystical cultures and also religious teachings, because I think it's the closest way to understand who we are in relation to, as humans, in relation to the consciousness that we are. So let's get into how do we manifest, right? So mind, realm 3, this is the filter that conditions source's infinite potential into form, right? This is why what you hold in mind what you hold. And when we talk about mind here, we're not just talking about mentally, right? We're talking about, again, as a person believes in their heart, right? The conviction, right? What you hold in conviction is what manifests. Now, why do some things manifest easily and others don't? That's a great question. Thank you for asking. The degree of effort required for a manifestation to happen is determined by density. Remember earlier, we got into conversations about different metals and alchemical principles and why certain metals stay and fall to the bottom, when certain things like wood and etc. flow easier down rivers, right? The degree of effort required for a manifestation to happen is determined by density, okay? There are 3 levels of density when it comes to manifesting. This is how this works. 0 density, okay? This is lightness. This is wholeness. This is at the end of the meditation that Jen led earlier, when you felt infinite, when you felt that there was no limitation to you, or maybe when you did the source meditation this morning, if you're doing that, right? You felt that literal lightness. There's no heaviness. There's formlessness. This is 0 density consciousness. Okay. Then we get into light density, which is realm 3. That's where light density starts. In other words, it's not super heavy, but light is beginning to diffuse into form, right? That is where imagination, state, belief, assumption, stories, feelings, identities, thought, ego, conscious, vibration, emotion. That's where the form and the condition begins to happen. And ultimately taking us into heavy density, which is universe, world, body, action, matter. Think about the last time you tried to do affirmations after you woke up feeling like shit. How heavy were you? How pretentious did you feel? There's a reason. Because what happens here for most people is they focus on realm 4 to change the heaviest density. They try and change from the end of the chain. Imagine for a second, we have a chain here. And here's the start of the chain that controls the majority of the motion. And here's the end, right? Here's realm 4. Most people are trying to change this chain out with another one, not knowing that the only reason this chain is here is because this one's here. We cannot separate the fundamental mechanics of reality from the experiences that we have. And this is why understanding this will be dramatically transformational in your life. When we identify primarily with the body and the world, it feels heavy, right? It feels burdensome to manifest change. When we're feeling limited, think about this. When you're feeling limited, when you have an anxiety attack, right? When you go through a state of panic, even if it's for 10 seconds, and you try and do anything from that state, it's the hardest thing in the world. And this is why our recalibration process is so important. We're going to teach you this process tomorrow during session 4. Because as long as you're trying to change your world from the place of the world, as long as you're trying to shift limitation from a place of limitation, you're not doing this the most effectively or efficiently. We are limited by the density of physical matter because we feel physically responsible for manipulating matter. Just think about this. Think about the heavy states. You go to affirmations, they get really heavy. You don't like them. You feel pretentious. And you think about in that moment, everything around you, your finances, your career, your relationships, it all feels so heavy to move and modify and navigate. But think about what happens, right? Because you feel like you have to do so much. Think about what happens when you're back in that meditative state of beingness. When you've gone through a recalibration process, you've brought yourself to where you feel light and limitless. Think about how you relate to matter and forms. Think about how easier it is for you to even believe that the universe is supporting you, that you don't have to be responsible for every single form of matter coming into your life when you're living from that 0 density state. And of course, the experiences that you have, they follow. And I know, I almost guarantee every person here understands exactly what's being said. We are limited by the density of physical matter because we feel physically responsible for manipulating the matter. What does that imply? When we feel physically responsible for manipulating matter, we're identifying as a separate limited being. We are not identifying as the infinite consciousness that we are. We want to take some time to recognize this, because how we approach what we approach determines how we experience what we are approaching. And that's the choice you have this weekend. You have the choice to make this light. You have the choice to move into a space of effortlessness. And that's where we're going. We then begin to learn about metaphysics, right? Begin focusing on using the mind, realm 3, to create change. It's less dense, but there's still density, and so effort is still required. We learn about the double slit experiment. We learn about a lot of mental alliterations of how consciousness becomes reality. I think Louise Hay is a really good example of metaphysics, honestly, and love to her. She's amazing, right? But a lot of us go here, we begin using the mind. So now we're either using realm 4 or realm 3 to try and affect change, but it's still dense. And because it's dense, we still have a lot of effort to go. And here, what happens is we identify with the mind, understanding that thoughts create reality, but thoughts require constant attention and care. And this results in density. How amazing would it be if you didn't have to be hypervigilant over your thoughts? How amazing would it be if you didn't have to be hypervigilant over states of consciousness and still be able to experience the life that you want? This is why we go to realm 1. Because as long as I'm playing around in the sandbox of realm 3 and realm 4, I'm not making nearly the amount of change that I could be making. And in fact, I'd venture to say that my strength in realm 3 and realm 4 is diffused to such a point to where I find myself in perpetual states of struggle. That's where most people go with the technique thing. And when we launched the I Am experience a long time ago, I think we actually launched it a couple of weeks after COVID or before COVID started. The whole goal here was to get people back to the source, get off the manifesting hamster wheel, right? That was the terminology that we used. Because for many of us, we're just cycling through vision boards and daily affirmations and writing I am rich and pouring water into one cup labeled future and transdimensional surfing and all these things. And look, dude, there's no judgment if you want to do all that. Like, I'm not here going to sit here and judge you, but honestly, it's not necessary. I've never poured water in a freaking cup labeled future in my life. And I've manifested everything that I wanted to. Again, that's realm 3, realm 4. That's mental games that most of us use to really avoid what is actually happening. If you're trying to affect things from realm 3 and realm 4, you're completely missing realm 1, which is your true essence. And if you're not shifting your true essence, if you're not reconditioning your true essence, then what is the point in playing in realm 3 and realm 4? If you've ever had a music box that has characters on top, most music boxes, there's 2 ways that you can get the sound to play. There's usually a mechanism on the surface. I have one that's upstairs and it has, I think it's ice skaters on it. And I can push the ice skaters back, kind of like, give that little click and have them go for a couple minutes. I can also go underneath the music box and I can twist this thing. I can twist this thing down here. What's going to happen when I'm twisting that thing? I can let it go and those skaters will skate for hours. They'll skate for hours. And how amazing is that? How amazing is that by making a fundamental modification, not a surface level modification, not just pushing the skater back a couple times around the circle, but going to the source of what causes the skater to skate and working there, all of a sudden, the skaters are going to skate effortlessly, and I don't have to sit there and repeatedly go back and push them on their track so that they can continue to go into a circle. They're going to go in a circle on their own for a very long time. Why? Not because I've messed with them, but because I've modified what makes them move. So the masters, right? We call them masters. Nisargadatta, Levinson, Ramana Maharshi. The masters understand how to use realm 1 to create change. This layer creates no density. It contains no density. Well, it creates density, contains no density. So manifestation becomes effortless. And when we're talking about effortlessness, we're not talking as much about the effortlessness of the body as we are about the effortlessness of consciousness. In other words, your ability to move from one state into another completely without being phased by beliefs from the previous state. When we move from realm 1, when we move and modify and act from realm 1, the density is minimal because I'm operating as an infinite being experiencing finite states rather than a finite being experiencing infinite states. Most of us, we don't go to the core of our identity and make change from there. We do surface level work. There's no judgment, right? That's why you're here. You're here. I'm convinced you're here because you're ready to go to the next level. And the next level isn't a new set of techniques. It's a deeper understanding of your identity. Because when you know you're loved, you're free to be intimate. But when you do not know that you are loved, you are not free. I don't care how many hoops you jump through, how many jump ropes you do, how many Hail Marys you say, how many Statecans to sleep you do. Most people never stop struggling manifesting because they're trying to affect change from realm 3 and realm 4 instead of going back to realm 1. And I can guarantee you the effort that you put into manifesting something when approached from the place of realm 1 will always have less effort in movement than trying to affect change from realm 3 and realm 4, because the law doesn't change. And this is really important to hear. We're not changing the law of assumption or the law of attraction. It does not change. What you embody, what you are convicted of, becomes your truth. So the reason we're playing in realm 3 and realm 4 is because we think we're changing our convictions by standing in the mirror telling ourselves that we're handsome and pretty and sexy when we don't believe it at all. And maybe, yes, you do it enough, you spend enough time in front of the mirror, really close, staring at yourself, staring into your soul, maybe it'll work. But why do I want to do all that? I got shit to do, man. I got stuff to create. We're creating legacies here. We're creating big things. We're creating dream lives. And the truth is, in the midst of our infinity, YOLO. Because the truth is, the longer you spend waiting to dive into whatever it is that you want completely, the longer you will spend regretting the fact that you didn't do it sooner at the end of your life. And the truth is, most of us aren't even guaranteed that here. Most of us may not die of old age. That's fine. Doesn't matter. Even more reason. You have no good reason to not fully immerse yourself in the infinity that you are and go after everything that you've ever wanted. And every limiting belief that you use to justify why you're not is bullshit. It is absolute garbage. Notice how I said it's garbage. You're not garbage, you're beautiful and pure. But the shitty beliefs that you carry are garbage. And in no way objectively true. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Isn't it a wonderful thing that I don't have to be defined by the standards that this world tends to define people by? And the truth is, some of you are going to take me here and you're going to take me literally and you're going to see transformation. And some of you are going to take this metaphorically and you're going to continue looking for techniques. And I can guarantee you, when you're done with your techniques, this is where you go. Because there is no more of a powerful conduit of consciousness than the one that has realized their true essence fuels everything that they feel and think and do. Most people are playing in the shallow end with manifesting, trying to manifest a meal, trying to manifest just enough to pay the bills, And I can appreciate it, but why? And that's a rhetorical question. Why? On the other end of that, how can I live and form the infinity that I am to such a degree that the value I bring into this world far outweighs what it is that I receive? See, most people get caught up in their obsession with the destination, especially as it relates to manifesting. And what I've noticed, because I've done A/B testing, it's a term we use in marketing to split test different positions and pieces of copy and ads. I've done A/B testing, and every single time I'm obsessed with the destination, not only does my entire life become dry, it becomes almost idealistic in nature, becomes dull. I'm always perpetually seeming to be separated from the destination. But the moment I become okay with the journey, the moment I focus on the journey, the moment I focus on the discipline that I know I need, discipline as in returning to my state of beingness, being mindful with my health, making decisions in my relationships, my business, that are truly in the benefit of all involved at the highest vibrational frequency. The moment I begin to do that, all of the goals that I have, they are effortlessly accomplished. And that's some game right there. Because a lot of you're focused on getting shit. And that's fine. I'm not here to judge you for that. I love to get stuff. But I don't love to get stuff as much as I look at how much I can give. What is the biggest way you could serve this species? If you truly chose to embrace the infinite consciousness that you are, how could you serve this species? Because when you really think about service, at least for me, when I think about high levels of service, the money is already there, right? So a space company, taking people into space, doing some work on interplanetary bodies, the moon, contributing to mining on the moon, contributing to life systems and mining on Mars. When I start to think on that level, the money becomes a byproduct as I put those plans into action. And the money is so much more than I could even think. Prices to send people to space, $50,000 for a couple hours, a couple days maybe. I've got a friend, a very close friend of mine. She's a CEO, lives out here. She's got a company called Orbital Assembly. And they've got an $85 million valuation for building habitats in space. And she's all on board with this kind of stuff. And I love it. I love seeing people dream massively, because that's the reality of this. If you're playing small, you are doing a disservice to yourself, to the consciousness that you are. And the truth is, the bigger you dream of service, the more of a reward that you'll see. And this is where I like to go with manifesting, because the truth is, the more I focus on getting things, the more everything just dries up. But the more I focus on giving as bigly as I can, as bigly, as most effectively as I can, right? Everything happens as a result. This is probably one of our most successful retreats. And yet I can tell you, when Dave and I started working on this, money was not even a thing. Numbers, we weren't focused on key metrics. Sure, we wanted a lot of people to show up, but the goal of building this retreat for you was providing the most authentic, where we are, distillation of these teachings that we've ever provided. We're going to wrap up here soon, I promise. I'll let you get your witch and your bagels. I don't know what you're doing for lunch, but through surrender to source, infinite power and intelligence is invoked. And so there is no sense of effort. Change becomes instantaneous. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. We've all heard it. When I move from realm 1 in consciousness, and I truly move, I'm not talking about I kind of move a little bit. I'm talking about a full movement in consciousness. I cannot help but see everything completely differently. Because all of a sudden, I've completely reinterpreted everything through the lens of the infinite being that I am. And all of a sudden, what I'm looking at it appears to change. Maybe because it did change. Probably because I changed. See, most of us, if we had the ability to look at the things, especially the things that we don't like, a little differently, we would find our way out of them, because you are infinite intelligence experiencing itself subjectively, and you don't need anybody to save you. And if you could enter into a state of consciousness that reflected the solution of the problem that you're trying to solve, there's a 99.9%, 100% chance that the consciousness that you are would bring a solution to mind, giving you the insight to act and solve the problem that you have. But see, most of us are looking out here for solutions. The solution is right here. And it always has been. What does Rumi say? You spend your entire life looking for something that was around your neck the whole time. So embodied in the zero density state, the entirety of reality bends around you. What's really interesting here is that the zero density state reflects light. It reflects light, lightness, flow, and all of these things. My ability to navigate what is happening. Think about that. Think about light for a second, just traveling through a solar system. Light traveling 186,000 miles per second. Now think about a cruise ship. Think about the Titanic, right? One of the reasons the Titanic hit that iceberg is because A, they were ignorant and weren't really looking out for what was in front of them. But B, the ship was so big, it was so dense, that turning it at the radius in which they turned it and the speed and all the factors involved was not enough. And they hit the iceberg and they sunk. But you think about photon, light, I can't even move my hands as fast as light goes. So what would happen if I'm embodied in that zero density state? What happens to my ability to navigate reality? Right? Kind of like Neville says, when you change a state of consciousness, you're not generating a new reality. You're revealing to yourself what was already there. Right? Because we see everything through the lens of the state of consciousness that we are living in. So we want to get into the zero density state. So in session 2, we're going to begin to explore the zero density state. We're going to explore its tonalities, its sensations. We're going to explore teachers from all around the world who have said something or have taught about it. And ultimately, we're going to really begin to dive into logistics, because that's our goal for you here, is to be able to access this zero density state as much as you possibly can. I can guarantee you, based upon the frameworks that we've already put into play with the Goal Accelerator Source, this is the most powerful framework we have ever developed for consciousness activation. So ultimately, we're going to wind down session 1 today. It has been a lot. I really encourage you to sit over the next hour, eat your lunch, have some fun. I don't want you to feel like you need to take all of this in immediately, okay? We are doing 8 hours of work in 2 days. That's a lot. That's a lot. But the goal here is to feed you in such a way that you don't need to leave this retreat looking for more that you don't have. That's how we define our metrics of success here. Our goal is to help you leave this retreat. And ultimately, I mean, honestly, maybe use us as a stepping stone to integrate it, but then do your thing. Because the truth is, I mean, I know many of you here, and I know how many years you've been in this space, and I know how much time and money you've spent in this space looking for the ultimate truth, looking for the ultimate essence, the ultimate state. And that's where we're going here. So in session 2, we're going to begin to dive into that state. We're going to dive into what we are going to really be even getting into tomorrow. Tomorrow, what we will do is activate the zero density state with a very specific meditation about 3/4 of the way through session 4. So tomorrow is all about the how. All right. There you go. Thank you so much for joining us in session 1. I'm going to hang out for a little bit. I want to open it up. Yes, Veronica, the practice will come tomorrow at the end of session 4. I want to open it up for a hot seat. I'm going to go through the chat here. There's no pressure to stay on. If you're going to hop off, just be sure to be back in this room about an hour from now, and we will get session 2 started. Thank you for joining us for session 1. We've only just begun. Good stuff. Dave, do you want to put on the session video?
Yeah, let me fire that up.
Good stuff. We'll be hanging out for a little bit. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and join us soon. I'm going to end this recording.